Hello, YouTube. Starting to sprinkle outside. Just wanted to update you on the video series I'm currently running and give you some backstory and some information that may or may not be useful as more and more people are starting to lose their homes. If you've been following this channel for any length of time, then you kind of know the story. And if you were a patron all the way back in the day when I said a patron account, which I have disabled and stuff, but it followed my story on what happened when I became a homeless vet living out of a van. You know, even though that wasn't the original intent of the channel, but it ended up being that because I needed to do it for survival. So the videos that you were seeing and are seeing are basically just me trying to get myself back into some kind of normalcy where I'm not like constantly running from the cops and whatever. Even though I never really was truly running from the cops because I wasn't really doing anything wrong. But still, always the cops, even though I do support cops and like cops and most of my friends are cops, the problem is they're the enforcers of rules and regulations and law. And because of that, and my situation being on the other side, the side of the people who are homeless and have pretty much lost rights, okay, you're constantly having to butt head with the cops. Now, for me, luckily, all my police encounters weren't bad. You know, matter of fact, I didn't really have any bad encounters. Most of the cops were, actually not even most, every single cop that I encountered while living in a van was respectful and didn't try to kill me on the spot. I know it seems like the media portrays cops as always bad guys that are always beating people for no reason and stuff. I think a lot of it has to do, there may be some racial profiling and stuff, and even though I'm not white, I do fall under some profiles. But I think for the most part, it has to do with your initial response when an encounter occurs. Now, some cops, I've had racial cops and, you know, saw their behavior and stuff, and I knew it wasn't normal. But for the most part, usually the initial interaction you have with the cops, like when they ask you for your ID, or if they ask to see your driver's license or your registration or something like that, if you comply and you're not acting like an a-hole or whatever, most of the time, I would say it goes fairly smoothly. But that's a whole another topic that we'll talk about later. I wanted to fill you guys in because people are still thinking that I'm living in that abandoned building or trying to move into that abandoned building. That was a couple of years ago when the ordeal started, and I'm going to put things into perspective and timeline, okay? So people who are new to the channel got all scrambled because I had closed the channel down and removed like almost 2,000 videos that had chronicled everything in order, good, bad, and ugly. I'm trying to restore it back and put it into more of a semblance of order, not the all 2,000 videos, but videos that people might find useful, and making playlists and stuff for people to use to follow along what's going on. But the series you're seeing right now with me trying to move into that house, okay, that was about 2-3 years ago, I think. It's about 2 or 3 years ago. And timeline, this is what happened, okay? I went through a nasty divorce long ago. Actually was living in a condo, my sister's condo, for a while. But she was one of the first casualties, I guess, you know, if you can call it that, of the situation with America right now. America's decline had started a decade ago, basically. Some people were early, like me, and a whole bunch of other people lost their houses during the housing crash. Some people recovered, some never recovered. I didn't recover because all that was happening as I was going through a really nasty divorce that ended up going just out of hand. Totally messed up situation. So I lived with my sister. Actually, I didn't live with my sister. My sister had a condo that was being foreclosed, her condo. And she let me move in, and I was living out of a condo for a while. Then I met a woman, okay, and was actually engaged. I mean, we dated and stuff, and got engaged Well, I didn't get engaged. I ended up moving in with her, and then we got engaged like a year later. Yeah, about a year later. So anyhow, I moved in with a woman who is a postal carrier, mail carrier, and she helped me get a job with the post office. Okay, so I was working a pretty decent job. We were both postal carriers. She was not tenured, but like had been there for like 12 years, 10, 12 years. So she was doing okay, and I was what they call a CCA, city carrier assistant. That's where you're like getting ready to be. That's how they hire postal carriers now. Although the whole post office situation right now is so messed up, I think it's going to collapse. But as two mail carriers, we were doing very well, and we were doing mail though for South Florida, Jupiter and West Palm Beach areas, which Jupiter is like a really high-end area, and West Palm Beach has poor sections and really high-end, super, super rich areas. So those were the areas we were servicing, but we couldn't live there. We couldn't afford to live there because the cost of living was so high. So my fiance at the time had a house in Port St. Lucie, which is an okay area. It's similar to Brevard County, maybe a little slightly wealthier, just slightly, okay, but similar to the area where I am now. So I was living there with her, in her house, and doing the mail. And then as the relationship developed, we ended up breaking up, okay, but it was on good terms. I mean, it wasn't on good, when you break up, it's never really good terms, but it wasn't like crazy. Sometimes people go psychotic when you break up in a relationship. But she and I were calm about it, and we talked about it and arranged it. And she even let me stay an extra 3 months to get ready. And that's when the Living in a Van channels were formed. The Facebook and stuff, because I had to make a decision on whether or not I tried to stay down there in that area. I couldn't commute. See, we lived in Port St. Lucie, and I was working in Jupiter. So that was an hour commute every day to go to work. And gas down there in Jupiter was expensive, and Port St. Lucie was also expensive. So it was costing me about $700 a month in gas to commute to go to work. $700 or $800 a month just to drive back and forth to work. So I couldn't afford to do that. And we could afford together because we were carpooling, the two of us, so it was only costing us about $350 to $400 a month to do that, because there was two of us paying for gas. And we took each other's car back and forth, we took turns driving. But that's a whole nother thing on managing your money and stuff. So my option was to either move down to Jupiter, where the average rent, like even for one bedroom, was about $900 or more a month, $1,000 to share like an apartment with somebody. I couldn't afford to really stay in Port St. Lucie. It was I couldn't afford a $700 commute. Okay, and remember during that time I was having to pay child support for 2 kids. So I decided to do the inevitable. I decided to live in a van. So the Facebook page popped up showing people showing people how to do it and what was going on with me. So there are some viewers on this channel that are from that, the original viewers. I had about 200 people following me, wishing me well. So I became one of the original Living in a Van or Van Life channels on YouTube. Not from that time though. I was actually on Facebook, and then I found out that there was a difference between a page and a group, and I created the Living in a Van group, and that's when I became a YouTuber. Because as the founder of the group, I had put together all sorts of resources. Those of you who are on the Living in a Van Facebook group, which by the way I ended up having to leave, or actually ended up leaving to protect the group because of the incessant attack by the trolls and haters. They were that crazy. They were attacking the group and infiltrating and doing all sorts of crazy shit. So for the wellness of the group, I actually physically left. I have nothing to do with the group anymore. The group is on its own, running itself. So anyhow, I went on that group and started posting all sorts of useful information, links to YouTube channels, links to web pages and stuff on how to survive living in a van off-grid, how to get states, like claim a home state, how to do mailings, how to do all that stuff, all the stuff you need to survive living in a van, from van build to all the legal stuff. Then group members kept asking how you make money living in a van. How do you survive living in a van? Like if you're not on disability, if you're not on retirement, if you're not on whatever, and you're like a normal Joe Schmo like me, how do you survive? And all these people came up saying that, well, you should make a YouTube channel and you can make money on it. You can monetize your channel and all that. Back then, it was a little bit simpler to monetize a YouTube channel. YouTube didn't have all the crazy rules that it has now that's making it really hard to monetize, okay? Back then, it was like the wild, wild west of YouTube. You could just set a channel, and they let you sign a thing saying you were a YouTube partner, and when you hit a threshold, you didn't even have to have a threshold, actually, initially. You set up as a YouTube channel, and you had to have a thing called AdSense, which is a money account that you use that they pay you through. And most people who became YouTubers originally had like a website. They were bloggers and stuff. So they already had it set up so they could run advertising on their webpage, which this channel still has. It's stealthvan.com. So I set up stealthvan.com because I had to learn all this. I set up stealthvan.com, became a YouTube advertising partner for AdSense, and then embedded the code for YouTube to allow them to modify ads and put ads on my webpage, on my website. So stealthvan.com was born, and that started running advertising. And then it didn't make money. It made like 27 cents a month or something like that. It was crazy. But YouTube's became a lot more profitable. People suggested that or said that you should get on YouTube. So I decided to become on YouTube and learn how to monetize that channel. And the channel started making money. It took like about 3 months. And then the channel actually made like, in 3 months, the channel made, let me think. They would not pay you until you got $100, at least $100, and they would pay you. So it took 3 months for me to hit $112 initially. $112 in 3 months. And then they actually sent me a check. Actually, it was direct deposit. So I had set all that up. So that's when the channel started becoming profitable, and we can talk about that later. But then you're like, well, what's the whole deal with the squatters' rights and stuff? Well, it leads to what's going on right now. So I started making money on YouTube. I posted all that. I let people know. At the same time, I was going through, my separation with my my fiance, and started to build up the van. And the van was a stealth van that didn't really have a name. I guess they call him Mr. Gray. It was a gray 2006 Dodge Grand Caravan with the folding seats. Those of you who remember that well. It was a nice van. I rigged it, leaving the seats intact, but they folded down. So it had like a little living room and just a little bed mattress to sleep on. And that's how I lived as a mailman. And started developing all the power systems and stuff because I had to, obviously charge my cell phone because I had to go to work and stuff. And then worked out the systems with going to the gym to shower. All that stuff was being worked out back in like 2000, I think about 2015, 2016. So I did all that and learned how to do all that and was sharing the adventures on the Facebook and the YouTube. And then ended up moving back up to Brevard County because my sister was extremely ill and still is, has cancer, like stage 4 cancer. It's high. It's really bad. But I came back here on a humanitarian to just keep an eye on my sister. It seems like my whole family's dying of cancer. But that's a whole other video, you know. But because I had a sister just die of cancer since then, a different sister. But my sister, the one that had let me use a condo, was sick, so I came back to this area, still living in a van, and ended up moving to a house of one of the models. See, I do photography on the side. I had a model friend who had a house that was also being foreclosed. Everybody was starting to lose their house even back then. So the house was going to be foreclosed and they were going to lose it. They tried to sell it, they couldn't sell it, so it was going to definitely be foreclosed. But it had like a couple months of free time in it, you know, before they would actually come in and lock everything up and put a new lock on the door. So they let me live in that house. And I had the access to the house for 3 months. And during that time, well, even before that, I had lost the van. I'm not going to go through the whole story, but I lost the Mr. Gray, and I had to go through other vans. It became complicated. So I built up like Pontiac, the Hannah, the Pontiac Montana, and all sorts of other stuff. So we're not going to go through all that, but there was a bunch of other vans that were built before Little Blue. Eventually, all those vehicles broke down because I bought cheap vehicles that I didn't know how to fix. Unlike Timothy, who rebuilt everything to make the old vehicle almost brand new, I just drove it till it dropped. And sadly, most of the cars I bought, they died really fast. People were selling them even though they were pretty much dead. But, you know, they weren't charging an outrageous price. It was like usually $1,000 or less. That was like my budget for buying a car. So those cars kept dying until I got Little Blue 1. And moved into Little Blue 1, drove Little Blue 1 until somebody rear-ended me, really bad accident that left me unable to walk. And I was facing potentially being maimed for the rest of my life. Thank goodness for PT, physical therapy, actually brought me back. So I had like 6 months of physical therapy and was able to heal up. And I ended up meeting another woman and moved in with her. But I told her at that point, after going through all those relationships, that I didn't really want to get married again. I don't want to get married, okay? I didn't want to get married anymore, having gone through a failed marriage and a failed engagement. So I told her that up front. We moved in together, and I lived there for a while, but then she wanted to get married. Guys, when a woman says she doesn't want to marry you, she might not be telling you the truth. So after living there for like a year or so, she wanted to get married, and I did not. I still said, hey, I told you I don't want to get married, you know? I'll live with you for the rest of our lives, but I'm not getting married again. It's just, it makes things too complicated. If you just want to live together and you want to get married, I think you can do that. I think when you get married, you better be damn sure it's the right person, okay? So I wasn't going to get married, and we ended up breaking up. And then I became full-time in the van. And those that were following back then, you saw me as that's when the YouTube really took off as living in a van vlog, you know, covering my life. Because prior to that, there was only like 20 videos on there kind of showing how to build out a van. Okay, those videos that were on there were being built as I was breaking up with my fiance, well, not my fiance, my girlfriend at that time. And she let me stay there to finish up the van, and then I was out. So you saw those vlogs initially. It had me with my kid fishing, me and my kid making the bow and arrow, doing the $10 survival challenge, and all those videos that are now gone because of the weirdos stalking me. So I can't really put too much personal stuff up here, with my family at least. So I was looking at the possibility of being homeless again. I had enough money that I could actually potentially get a room somewhere, because I was still working at the post office, okay, as a CCA, a city carrier assistant. But I wanted to have spending money. I didn't want to put my money, like pay upwards of, you know, roughly $500-600 to share a room somewhere and have no money left over. So I wanted to have money so that I could do things with my children. And said, you know what? If I live in a van which I had done before, okay, I could save anywhere from roughly, because you got cost of living that's associated with living in a van too. It's not free, okay? Contrary to what people believe, it's not free to live in a van, okay? You got to pay your insurance, you got to pay your gas, and cost of things go up kind of because of, you living in a van, you're spending more on gas. And even food costs more because you can't store food not too long, and other stuff like Planet Fitness showers and things like that. So I figured I could save a whopping $600 to $800 a month. I could save every month $600 to $800. That just goes into savings. And the idea was to rebuild myself back up. But those of you who have followed me, I get a lot of bad luck. Things keep happening, like the vehicles keep breaking and all this. Because when you don't have a lot of money, you can't afford a good vehicle. You can't afford to get it fixed. So you're driving a piece of crap until it breaks, and then it gets expensive. So you gotta buy another piece of crap because that's all you can afford. It's like a cycle that repeats itself once your credit is shot, which is what happens to a lot of people when they go through a divorce, especially a nasty bad one. So what happened was I kept trying to save money, and then the house foreclosed. I was in the van, living full-time in the van in Brevard County. And that's when the channel became the vlog that you see. But I also knew that I didn't want, because it wasn't like a checklist, a bucket list thing to do to live in a van. It was a survival. It was I want to do this because this is exciting. I want to do this because I want to travel. I want to do this because I'm retired or whatever, and I don't have to, I have very limited expenses. No, I was still having to pay child support. I was still having to work. I was having to try to rebuild my life back. And that's why I was living in a van. To save money is what it came down to. Now, I didn't want to live in a van, okay? And I was looking for ways of getting out of living in a van that I could transition that didn't cost too much money. You can either rent somewhere, but then, all your money, if you're only making a little bit and you're having to pay child support, for 2 kids, you really don't have any money left at all. Like they were garnishing, at the time, because I was making more money, they were only taking about 65% of my income. But see, as I lost money, because I wasn't, I lost the post office job, they were taking upwards of 85% and expecting me to live off like $25 a month. But that's what I was living off pretty much. But anyhow, I ended up looking for ways to get a house or into some building that was my own. And then I remembered that I was a mailman down in South Florida, down in Jupiter. I told you that was an expensive area. I saw groups of people that had banded together to take over abandoned houses. Okay? And I was like, how are they doing this? Okay, because I knew they were there, and I was a postman, and I had reported it to my postmaster, my boss, and they didn't do anything about it other than, well, nobody officially lives there. Nobody's claimed the address, so the post office let it go. I don't know if the police or the city saw. They were openly living in those houses. Literally, the house had been vacated because it was being foreclosed, so the people left it before the sheriff came and put a padlock on the door. That's what most people do. They just leave. They pack up their goods and they move in with the other family or something. And then the house is just left abandoned. Now, at the time, the banks were foreclosing on a lot of houses. And the banks would gain the houses and let it sit there and rot. Literally rot, including multi-million dollar mansions. They were foreclosing so fast, like they're about to do right now, okay? They were foreclosing on all these properties everywhere that they couldn't even maintain them. So all these properties were falling into the bank's hands, and the banks were not doing anything with those houses. They were just letting them sit there and overgrow with weeds and roof collapsing, like you saw the fancy beachfront home that I went to explore. Because I thought, okay, and I was like, okay, and you're like, what's he mean taking it? Well, when I was postman, even before I lost everything, when I was still engaged, I was engaged to my fiance in South Florida. I was looking into the legalities of it and how they were doing that. I was like, how are they able to move in there? And why is the police not forcing them out? Well, it turns out it has to go through the court systems, and the court systems were bogged down with all these foreclosures. Banks weren't enforcing their houses that were sitting vacant. And I looked up the law, and it turns out in a lot of places in America, because American law is based on like European, British law, they have a thing called adverse possession. And it goes all the way back to the times when England had a king and queen or whatever. And what it had to do with was this. People would die or abandon their property, like their house, their castle, their building, whatever. They go and they never come back. And that property, the house or whatever, would sit there and rot. Does this sound familiar? It would just sit there and no one would live there. And nature has a way of overgrowing and taking things back. So you had all these properties that would just sit there and nobody was using it. And they weren't able to collect taxes. Remember, the cities are regulating all this. The government is regulating all this. So they weren't able to collect taxes from all this. So they had a law, a rule that the king or whatever, the kingdoms passed back in the day that said, if you could go and live in an abandoned property openly and show that you were now the owner, you were living there, after a certain amount of time, it became yours. You had to pay the taxes, you had to do all the stuff that the owner would have to do. You'd have to maintain the property, do everything that you have to. Well, those laws continued on into America when the Americans came here. So it allowed you to go into a property that was apparently abandoned, that you can see nobody lives there, it's just sitting there rotting. And you could legally just go in there and start living there, as long as the property owner doesn't file papers and stuff, doesn't come back and try to get you out of there. And in America, the way they get you out of there is they have to do a trespass on you. Okay? So they have to report it to the police, and the police serve you a trespass notice, so you at least get that warning. Okay? The police will come and tell you, hey, you've been trespassed, you need to leave. Generally, if the cops aren't beaters. If the cops are normal cops, they don't go around shooting you or whatever, okay? They are there to serve you the paperwork that went through the court that you are trespassing. Well, actually, they will come when the owner calls and proves that they're owners, and they'll enforce the law of trespass and serve you with a trespass notice. And then if you keep trespassing, that's when it involves the courts. So some of you are like, weren't you worried about the cops coming and all that stuff? I knew the cops might come. Okay, so it was like a gamble. It was a game of, can I stay here and live here openly? Okay, can I do it openly long enough? Because they had a rule, which, by the way, most cities are trying to get rid of, and I'll tell you about that and why they're doing it. But a lot of places have a rule that you have to live openly at that residence or that place and use it for the intent upon which it was intended. Like if you were in a factory and you moved into a factory that was abandoned, you need to run a factory. But if you moved into a residence, like a house, you needed to use it like a house. And you needed to openly use it. That means you can't hide. You have to be there so the police can see you, the neighbors can see you, everybody, the mailman can see you, everybody can see you, so that if the owner is notified, the owner can respond and come and issue, through the police, a trespass notice. You've been paying taxes, you've been openly fixing the house, you've been doing everything that you would do if you own that house, okay? You can file paperwork that takes title of the house. The owner doesn't respond. If the owner doesn't respond, that property legally becomes titled to you. You own it, just as if you bought it. There are people who have taken over $100,000 homes, mansions, and whatnot with that law. Now, with the homelessness situation increasing and stuff, what happened is, or is happening, a lot of cities are trying to negate that law. It's a law written from way back when America was formed, okay? It goes back to times of kings. Well, a lot of cities and stuff are now passing ordinances to give the police the power to kick you out even without the owner. And you're like, what does that mean? It means that if the neighbors complain, the police can come by and do a trespass on you without the owner. And you're like, how does that work? Well, what happens is the police would trespass you, the place doesn't get claimed, and the city claims it. The government now takes it. Yeah, talk about underhanded. So instead of letting, like, the original law's intent was that a valuable property doesn't just sit there and get wasted, that somebody is able to utilize it, and that the city can tax it and make money. The government could. Well, the government now in the United States, in a lot of places, are changing it to the point where if a property gets vacated, the only people that can legally steal it is the government, the city. So cities are claiming all those houses now. And either they're selling them through foreclosure sales or whatever, or they're actually tearing them down and leaving, because they don't want the liability. Because when the city owns it, if somebody goes in there and gets hurt, the city's liable. Okay, you can sue the city because they're the owner. They didn't maintain it. Okay, it's a liability. So cities will buy up houses and literally sell them cheap or tear them down, because the cities are now the owners. They're bypassing the citizens from seeing an abandoned house and moving in. Okay, that is happening more and more and more and more cities, because cities are passing those local ordinances. It's a city law. Some states are moving to do it, making it a whole statewide thing because of the heavy foreclosures. And that's about to really go into effect, crazy effect now, as more and more people have lost their homes. All these people have lost their homes, especially people in California and out west, where there's big fires. There's a lot of homelessness. Some of those homes people aren't going to go back to. It's going to be a big mess, but that's what's going on. So, jump forward to 2 years ago. I'm living in the van. I know that this is, for me, living in a van is a temporary thing, not a way of life. I'm not a glamour channel. I'm not a van life channel. I'm not a van lifer, even though I'm living in a van. So the quest for me was always to try to find a home. Okay, and those of you who really follow the channel, you know that what this channel has been about is me getting a home, getting stable, becoming normal. When I say normal, I mean more similar to everybody else, so I don't stand out, so I don't have to worry about the police constantly knocking on my window saying, hey, you can't park here. You know, it was a dream of becoming normal. And some of you are like, but you were picking really bad places. Yeah, because I felt that those places I could fix up, and the city, for the most part, and the police and stuff would leave me alone, because I wasn't really doing anything bad. I was actually taking a drug-infested place or whatever and trying to make it normal. And I was actually chasing away. Some of you were worried about me because of all the druggies and stuff. I was actually dealing with them. I was chasing them. most I know a lot of you think druggies and stuff are dangerous. Most of them are homeless people, okay? And they're homeless, could be through situations similar to mine, but they couldn't recover, or some of them chose homelessness. Some of them were runaways, and you know, they got caught in that situation, and it's almost impossible to get back out. And worse off for them, they succumb to drugs. I never do drugs. I never did any drugs. I don't do drugs. I don't even drink, okay? I don't do anything like that, because once you do that, you've picked a path that's going to be extremely hard to recover from, because your brain is what has the power to get you back out. Your brain is what's going to try to save you. So you got to try to protect that brain. You got to try to protect your ability to figure things out instead of just trying to cover it and hide it. Because if you get into drugs and alcohol and stuff, you're numbing the brain, but you're continuing down the wrong path. So I was picking houses that I thought might not be a problem. The beachfront property was extremely nice, but I knew that that's a multi-million dollar property that the bank will more than likely come back to. And not only that, it's in an exclusive area where there are very rich people, which means if they see me living there, they're going to call the police, and the police will come up with some kind of new law or rule with the city that'll pass it if they have to kick me out. So the thought crossed my mind to try to move into that beachfront house, but I knew that the chance of successfully pulling that one off would be extremely slim. And I continued the search to look for houses. Meanwhile, Walter, those of you who remember Walter, had contacted me about living in a house, his house. The deal that he did with me was there was a big giant tree. I don't know if you guys remember Denoy versus the tree. Big giant tree that had fallen down across his property and 3 other properties. It went across 4 houses. That's how big that tree was. And he didn't have the money to remove it. And he wanted to be able to sell or rent out his house. But he couldn't do that because insurance wouldn't cover it and stuff with that tree going across 4 yards. And he had already spent some money trying to get it removed. It didn't get removed. And he thought about it, and he was a viewer of this channel, and he decided, you know what, I'm going to lend Denoy a little hand and work out a deal where if he can cut the tree to try to get rid of it to the point where the property lines were all disconnected. I mean, you know, the tree had been removed off the fences and stuff, so all the properties were clear again. The only place the tree could sit in was his yard, okay? And if we could remove the whole thing, that would be great. If not, it's okay. As long as I was able to get rid of the tree from blocking him from being able to rent the house out or sell it. So I moved into Walter's house and did some work on the house as well as the tree. And I wanted to remove the whole tree, but that was impossible because of the size and lack of skills and tools and whatnot, okay? But I kept my end of the bargain by cutting the tree and removing it from the neighbor's yards and making it to the point where all 4 yards were now separate. Enough to the point that I think Walter was able to either sell or rent out his house. So those of you who don't know how I ended up in Walter's house and what the full story is, Walter contacted me offering me free, well not free, but reduced rent, okay, to live in his house if I would remove that tree. And I said, I'll do my best. And Walter decided my best was good enough. So we worked out the deal, and that's what happened. And the deal went through, the tree got removed, and I moved back out. And that's where the videos start off with the Denoy's adventures looking for a house. And it started with me just looking around, me looking at the laws of, if you want to learn how to take over a house, look up adverse possession, or squatter's rights. Just Google that, okay? Or you can YouTube it. Attorneys have come on YouTube to talk about adverse possession and squatter's rights. And it varies by state. More and more states are trying to get rid of that right because the states and the counties and the cities want it for themselves. They want to be able to take over the houses and not let citizens do it. And they're doing it because people don't know about it and people aren't protesting. Well, the people that are letting them do it are the same ones that are going to become homeless soon. It's basically the citizens who live there say, well, we don't want squatters moving in next door. Well, when you get your house taken away and you can't afford it, you're going to be one of those squatters. And you made the laws, you helped the city pass a law that blocks you from taking a house back. So the banks will own everything and it'll rot, and the cities will take it over when the bank can't deal with it, and the cities will just demolish it because it's a liability for them. The cities will first try to sell it, but if they can't sell it, they'll demolish it. So that's what's going on with those houses. But the law still exists in a lot of places, okay? So if you know of an abandoned property or something, you need to look up the adverse possession law for your state, your county, your city, or whatever, and squatters' rights. And there's specific rules, criteria, a list of stuff you have to follow. And one of them is living openly. And that's why timeline-wise, I'm gonna give you a timeline on how things happen. Okay, I knew of the law even before I built Hut 1.0. Do you remember Hut 1.0? Some of you are like, why is I openly doing this instead of hiding it? I was trying to claim that whole property out there. And the owner knew that once he got wind of it. Okay? But I got wind of it because I was openly showing him I was taking his property. That was one of the criteria. That was one of the rules. Okay? You have to do it openly. And I'm like, how much more open can you be than broadcasting it on YouTube? I was showing the whole world that I was going to do this. So I was openly moving into the property and setting it up and building a little house out there, a little yurt or whatever, and living out there openly, broadcasting it, showing everybody what I was doing. People were even coming to visit. That's how open it was. Until the owner saw it, got wind. Now he didn't do an actual trespass. So to be honest, the police aren't after me or anything like that. Okay, he did not serve. To do a trespass, it has to be served. It has to be served by the police, and they have to write all the stuff on it, and then they log it into their, I guess their book on you. Incidences involving you that you've been trespassed. And then somebody has to call you in on that trespass again, and then the police at that time can come and actually arrest you. Okay? So the owner came by, and he just wrote a little letter that said, hey, you're on my property. I'm going to ask that you clean up and leave. That, you don't come back and you don't keep bringing people here, basically, because I'm kind of, and it wasn't really the owner. I guess it's a guy that's watching it for the owner. But somehow, and because I'm broadcasting, I do want people to see. And I wanted the property owner to see so that they had the option to come and tell me to leave. Okay? And if they did that, I'd say, all right, I see it's not abandoned. I see that you still own it and that you're legally protecting your property, so I can respect that. But if there's no owner that shows up, then it's up for grabs. Okay? So that's what happened with Hut 1.0 and why it sort of went away. Because the owner came, I didn't want to deal with the legal system. I didn't want to fight him and go with the police. I can see now that that property wasn't abandoned, that people actually still own it and they're still watching it. And that means that property is off limits. Okay, you can't take that property because the owner is still claiming his ownership. So I moved into Walter's house after that. That's when Walter, had me move into his house and that whole shebang. So I began again looking. Remember, all this stemmed from me being a postman and seeing that group living in those nice houses down in Jupiter. I was like, but there was like a group of them. There was like about, I think, at least 4 to 8 people doing it. They were doing it as a team. It's easier to do it as a team because all 4 or 8 people have to be served the no trespass. And they have to get your name. See, legally, when you file papers, you have to be able to get somebody's name, legal name, and all this stuff. So you can't trespass somebody you don't know. You have to be able to tell who they are because that's how the law works. You can't just anybody. So having a big team meant they had to track down all those people. And I would see when the city was trying to deal with them, because I was a mailman. It had to have certified mail and it had to be for each person. Or named, all the persons had to be named on that lawsuit or whatever. The trespass notice and the lawsuit and everything else that ensues to try to get them out of there. So I already knew all that, and that started me on the adverse possession game. Trying to find a property that I think I could reasonably move in and claim ownership if it's truly abandoned. If it looked truly abandoned, which a drug-infested house looked truly abandoned, okay? Druggies were there, and you're like, weren't you afraid of the druggies? No, I wasn't, because these were people that I knew were worse off than me, okay? They were worse off than me, and they needed help. Honestly, the city should not be letting them roam the streets, living on the streets, shooting up drugs. And, they were people who were unfortunate in the sense that they had no ability. They didn't even have the ability like me to try to look up laws like adverse possession to try to take over that property. So that's what allowed me to move in, and I knew that at any moment they could try to get me for trespassing. And if they came to me for trespassing, I would have to deal with the police and the law. And most of the time, if the owner finds you or whatever, the first step is just asking you to leave. Arrests and all that other stuff, that generally doesn't happen unless you decide to fight back. If the police show up and they say, hey, you've been asked to leave. Because the police can't really trespass you unless the city or the owner, usually the owner, unless now, like I said, the cities are taking ownership. The police can't even make you leave, not unless they get word from the owner. Or in the case of the cities now, passing new laws that allow the city to take over those properties. So the police, they won't do anything. Not without a paper that says that they can kick you out, that you're trespassing. So that's why I moved in. So if you want to, the story's going to end soon, but let me just give you a heads up. I think there's like 1 or 2 more videos in the series where it shows what ultimately happens. While I was there, some of you are like, you should try to find a legal way of taking it over, and you are absolutely correct. I was actually trying to track down the owner of the property during that whole time. Trying to see who owned it, to see what the deal was with the property, and if they were willing to sell the place, or if they just wanted me to stay there and just keep the vandals out until they sold the property. Keep the drug heads and all those people out, because there were needles everywhere, there were signs of drugs. It was just a dangerous place to be. And, I was going to contact the owner and tell him, hey, your property's being used by crackheads and heroin addicts and all this bad stuff. Now, I'm a homeless vet. I'm willing